Welcome to the Pan American Development Foundation panel discussion on the importance of humanitarian assistance to vulnerable migrants and their host communities. On the panel with me this morning are Mr. Jermaine Grant, the Project Director of the Pan American Development Foundation. We have Ms. Kean Chase of the Catholic Charities Guyana Migrant Support, and Ms. Sharon James of Lease of These. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
We are now going to ask Mr. Jermaine Grant to give us a brief description of the work of the Pan American Development Foundation in Guyana.
Firstly, thank you for having me. Essentially, the Pan American Development Foundation, PADF for short, is an international non-governmental organization based in Washington, D.C. PADF is the foundation arm of the Organization of American States, OAS, and for more than 4 years, PADF has been doing a lot of work in Guyana on migration in response to the Venezuelan crisis and the inflow of migrants, vulnerable migrants from that country of Venezuela. So for that period of time, we have been doing a lot of work in terms of supporting vulnerable migrants and refugees from Venezuela along supporting host communities. And within that population, it's not just the question of Venezuelans coming to Guyana, but returning Guyanese and the indigenous populations.
Well, Mr. Grant, thank you very much. My first question to the panel is, what is humanitarian assistance?
Well, essentially, humanitarian assistance is assistance provided to a population in crisis, and those assistance primarily is providing food assistance, shelter assistance on a short-term basis. And that form of assistance is essentially to support the affected population and the host community to move from a part of vulnerability to self-sustainability based on those services that are provided in a short term, to put them on a part of long-term livelihoods and meeting their needs of their families.
Ms. Chase, what would your explanation be?
Humanitarian assistance for me is basically assisting vulnerable populations who may be in a crisis. It can be a man-made crisis, it can be a natural disaster, but immediately they're in need of helping to alleviate the situation that they're going through right now, so that they can prepare for a better life in the short term.
Ms. James?
For me, humanitarian assistance is the kind of assistance that is given to persons in need based on the need that they have at the moment. And that need varies in time, because immediately they might need food and shelter, but in the long term they may need English classes, language classes to help them to be able to settle in and to adapt to the new country where they have migrated to. And so those are some of the services that we seek to provide, and as we work with the persons in need, we find new vulnerability of those persons, and we try to assist them along the way until they're more settled and able to take care of themselves.
How would each of you describe the importance of humanitarian assistance to both migrant and host communities?
I believe that when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance, you must have a balance. The importance of humanitarian assistance for the host community is to not have a conflict with the migrants that are settled within that host community. Often what is applied is a ratio internationally when it comes to supporting migrants and host communities. The support to the host community sometimes is conditioned because the migrants that are vulnerable are in that community, and some of the benefits that they receive trickle down to the host community. So the important thing is to provide assistance to all the populations in an equitable way, to ensure some level of balance, to avoid conflict, and to also take into account equally some of the vulnerabilities that exist within the host population. So the importance is to ensure there's effective integration and to ensure that the service, where possible, is equitable, taking into account some of the needs also of the host population as it relates to the needs that exist among both the migrants and the host community in humanitarian assistance.
Ms. James?
Yes, added to what Jermaine would have said, the importance of the host communities, because when we talk about humanitarian assistance, I think automatically people think of outsiders coming in. But the reality is the same vulnerabilities, the same challenges that the outsiders, so to speak, those who are coming into our country, they're running from. We have people who are currently living here in Guyana going through the same thing. So it's very important for us to offer humanitarian assistance, because the reality is the government can't do it all. And with their support, there is a gap that we can fill, which can ensure or at least support, in many cases, families and individuals transition to a better life.
Yes, let me just expand a little on the point Kean just made in that government cannot do it all. And because they can't, there's usually pockets of persons who experience a level of depravity in the society. They are underserved populations, and that is the population of people that we try to help, both local and foreign. And more often than not, when the foreigners come in, migrate for whatever reason they're here, they end up living in these communities because it's cheaper to live there. They experience the same kind of thing, so their circumstances are the same, more or less. And so when we go into a community like that, we meet both foreign and local. So we extend assistance to everyone, so that there's not a feeling of these foreigners come and you're taking care of them, and we are here, this is our country, and we don't get help. So we extend that help, and in turn, they also assist the foreigners. They're kinder to them. They're more willing to extend support to them, because when they get help, the others get help too.
Yeah.
So.
Now, this question is directed to Ms. Chase and Ms. James. What are some of the possible challenges migrants in host communities can face when they're attempting to access support?
Knowledge. Knowing where to go has always been a challenge, especially for those pockets of people who are what we might call tucked into far-flung areas. So we know Georgetown, Region 3, these are the most populated, and they commonly, what we might say, the urban areas. But like Ms. James would have said, many of the vulnerable communities, they usually go into those rural areas that you have to discover. And sometimes the information that we are sharing are not able to get to those areas. So it is sometimes difficult for them to even know that there are services available that can help them to alleviate whatever they're going through and to assist them, because of the lack of knowledge. So that is like one of the main things for us in our work, word of mouth, and really trying to go out there and not being centralized in the work that we do, so that we can really reach those that really are in need. Yeah.
For me, language is also a huge challenge, because if they can't really express themselves, if they're not articulate enough to explain what their needs are and what their challenges are, sometimes even when they're ill and they go to the hospital or somewhere and they can't really explain what's going on, and the personnel at the hospital might not be able to understand what they're saying, those are some of the challenges you might have. Those are some of the challenges I have experienced in our when dealing with the migrants and so on. Apart from language, there is also employment. And that also can stem from not being able to speak the language. So employment is an issue. If they can't work, then they can't take care of themselves. If they're unwell, then they can't work and they can't take care of themselves. So it's a circular problem. And unless we address the challenges of the migrants in a holistic manner, giving them food occasionally, that is short term, and I mean literally short term. So, we try to address all aspects of the migrants, the challenges that they face on a daily basis. We try through PADF to deal with all of the aspects of it so we can have them both physically, mentally, and in terms of language be able to participate in their day-to-day livelihood.
Given what both Ms. Chase and Ms. James would have said, is there a criteria that is used when selecting persons who may need support?
Depends on the service. Of course, we wouldn't offer English as a second language for someone who may be a Guyanese returnee and they're speaking English. But it really and truly, what we try to do at our office as migrants contact us via Facebook, social media, phone, if they walk into our office, however they contact us, we try to listen to what are their first need, and then we try to understand what is the whole situation, because some persons might think right now my problem is the children are not going to school. Okay, so why are the children going to school? Because I don't have a translated document. It could be as simple as that. It could be sometimes we don't know what is the process to get them into schools. We have everything, but we just don't know where to start. So when it comes to giving assistance, one of the things for us, it's important to understand each person as an individual and look at it as a case by case. So there are different criterias, yes. For example, you might have a family that is in need of shelter assistance. You might have a family that is in need of food because somebody is unemployed for a period of time for whatever reason. But is that the only criteria, the unemployment? No, but it could be that this is the only thing that they need right now to fill the gap to help them to continue on the path that they're moving towards a better life. So for us, it's really not a criteria per se, a hard and fast, oh, well, you have to check these boxes, but we try to look at each person as an individual and analyze it as a case by case.
Ms. James?
Yeah, same as Ms. Chase. We use a case-by-case basis to determine the needs of the family. It might be a case where there's a particular person in the family that needs support, and in other cases, it might be the entire family that needs that support. Not too long ago, we had a situation where there was a young boy who was ill. He was diagnosed with cancer. And so in his family, he was the primary beneficiary because of his particular situation. But the entire family also needed support because the father, who was the main breadwinner, was at the hospital day and night taking care of him because he was unable to even give himself a bath. So in that situation there, though the child is the primary beneficiary, the secondary beneficiary was the entire family because they needed that immediate support in order for them to be able to take care of him. So, when we look at it that way, some people, you might think that some people are getting help more than others, but it just depends on the situation they are in at that time. So that's how we deal with it.
If I could add to that, I think while in most cases or all cases it is based on individual assessment or case by case, all of that falls under what we generally define as a vulnerability criteria. So that vulnerability criteria, which definitely guides the work that our partners do, and some of the points that would have been mentioned by Ms. Chase and Ms. James, takes into account, for example, one's employment or unemployment status, if one has a disability, based on one's income, if one is homeless, and different forms of vulnerability criteria. So as soon as a person arrives for a service, certain questions are asked, and automatically you'll be able to determine the kind of support to be provided based on that vulnerability criteria. So there generally would be a vulnerability criteria. It's not hard and fast, but you do have to do individual assessment to determine how to respond to that individual case. Yeah.
My next question, and it is a follow-up to this question, and that is, how much of a difference do each of you believe humanitarian assistance makes in the lives of migrants and host communities?
very big difference. I mean, again, it depends on the service that is requested, because it could be where a family is back on their rent, and they're really at the point of being asked to please leave, and then what happens there? And it could be the follow-up for that is, let's say the husband, who is a construction worker, was ill with dengue, and he couldn't work for a month. He's the sole breadwinner. So the money that he would have earned that would have usually helped the family to stay afloat and have a roof over their head, that was something that was missed. So it could be us just intervening in that where we are paying their rent for the month, that helps the family to carry on smoothly. Host communities, like we said before, they suffer from exactly what the migrants, refugees suffer from. So that particular situation can be a local Guyanese reality. And that does not mean we're turning them away. We give them the same support, and again, we help them to carry on with their lives. So it really and truly depends on what the service is and how it is that sometimes how quickly we can administer support to that service. Because sometimes it's literally a matter of today the rent is due, tomorrow we can be at risk of eviction. So what happens there? And one of the things that I must say that I am very proud of in the work that we do, the Guyanese society is one where we're very understanding as a people. So most times, if we have a situation where locals or migrants are in a situation where it determines sometimes just a phone call and an explanation of, this is the situation, how is it that, can you please, be a little bit lenient or so. And we have had circumstances, I can say more than one, where the landlord or the employer would say, I understand and I am going to be lenient. So it really depends.
I think humanitarian assistance is absolutely necessary and makes a tremendous difference in the lives of the vulnerable population. Like Ms. Shea said, rent is a major issue when unemployment is a problem, employment is a problem. And sometimes, we have to step in immediately and go take care of that rent so that the family can stay in the home. And then if rent is a problem, then food also is a problem. So the assistance comes in more than just one particular area. My organization, we deal under 3 activities with PADF. We do protection, education, and livelihood. And under protection, that's where we do food, we do rent assistance. So all of that comes, sometimes one family in 1 month will receive a hygiene kit, which is, hygiene material to keep them clean and keep the household clean. And then they get a hamper, a food hamper, and they get rent assistance. And so that helps them to be, to take a little bit of the worry away in the immediately, and give them some time to balance themselves and get back to where they were before. So without that assistance, I mean, a lot of families would find themselves in a really bad situation, especially the ones with young children. They're, particularly vulnerable. And though we help everyone, I think we give particular priority to women and children, because even though they all are vulnerable population, the women and children are even more vulnerable than the others. So, so we look at all of that when we're giving help, what they need in the short term and how we can help them to be better in the long term.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of the importance and benefits of humanitarian assistance, it's a case-by-case question because, for example, for some persons, just knowing English is enough for them to be on a path of self-sustainability, where they can become employable, where they can communicate with their host community, where they can remove any question around xenophobia, where it can create ease in accessing services. For migrant children, it means the opportunity for you to be enrolled in the school system once you know English through the English classes that we would provide through our partners, and to be effectively integrated within the school system, to become part of the local society of the host community or the Guyanese society generally, and to improve your education so that you can be on a path of self-sustainability for when the time comes to go into the university or to access employment, access to health care. Sometimes people just need support in getting transportation assistance just to go to the hospital. Somebody to be at the hospital to help them to provide translation so they can indicate what sick they are experiencing. And especially sometimes even support outside of the general tangible support, providing psychosocial support, because some persons may have mental health issues because of trauma, moving from their country of origin, being Venezuela, to Guyana, and the integration process, the challenges. So just to hold persons' hand, to walk them through, to let them know that the service exists. Because interestingly, only last night I came across a migrant in Guyana. She was talking about the challenges in terms of documentation, having regular status in country. So to know that there's an organization that can assist them to regularize their status, or status is regularized, but it's just some challenges within that process in getting their documents translated to know where to go. So humanitarian assistance speaks to a variety of services, persons knowing that those services exist and where they can access it. And for the host community, they equally benefit too, because a lot of the services include TVET, your technical vocational educational training, where they can get a skill, become employable, access to jobs and whatnot. So there's great benefits to both the migrant and host, and often it's based on awareness, access, and some support along the way. And it's not a case where people are mendicant and dependent. They just want that little help to become independent or more strong and independent.
How accessible do you believe humanitarian support is for migrants and host communities?
Well, I think accessibility is based on creating greater awareness. And at the end of PADF, we do try to put as much information publicly as possible, especially using social media platforms. I think most migrants do use social media as a form of communicating with their families back home and in terms of day-to-day interaction. So at the end of PADF, we do exploit using social media platforms, Facebook, WhatsApp, and some migrants, they do have their own migrant groups. So in those spaces, a lot of information is created at the end of PADF, where those information are shared within on those social media platforms. And we do try as much as possible to use as much networks, migrant networks, working with international organizations within the UN system, importantly working with government, because a lot of the support that migrants access, they do access from government, and where their challenges at a frontline agency, let's say at the Ministry of Human Services, we would have information there in English and Spanish, where they can also access services from our NGO partners such as RCBG and Least of These. So I think it's to create the information in terms of visibility materials, videos, flyers, brochures, working on the ground. And I know Kean and Ms. James can speak to outreach activities. But social media is one medium, working with agencies such as UN agencies and government, where you have flyers and information that frontline staff can share in English and Spanish, and for persons to be aware where to go to access those services.
Yeah, I think everything that Jermaine would have said, but the good thing about getting the information out there with migrants is understanding where they are. And if social media is not accessible where they are, every migrant community, or I should say where they have settled, there's always a leader, like every community. You know, you walk into your street, who's the man who can speak at the city meeting or whatever? There's always that one person that you can go to who will help you to get an understanding of the community, the culture of the community, the layout, and giving them information. So we are based in Georgetown, but one of the things that we try to employ a lot for our work and the work that and sharing information is, like Jermaine said, the WhatsApp groups. They are very, very active in the WhatsApp groups, the Venezuelan migrants. So getting that information out there, and just to reinforce what he said, it's always important to have the information in English and Spanish. And the reason being, we have, like I said before, many Guyanese who are willing to offer assistance and willing to connect migrants to services. So once they know where they can send them, they are able to do so because the information is out there in a language that they understand. So we don't foresee any issues in terms of migrants in communities. And one of the good things is that the NGOs, it's a layout across. So I know for Ms. James, she has very good networking on the East Coast. And we know that the other organizations, in terms of the other regions, Region 7, Region 2, it's just sometimes a phone call away to get an understanding of what's going on. So the networking, it's very good, and getting that information out there, it's quite easy and quick once we hit the correct targets of the community leaders and the social media platforms.
Ms. James?
Yes. I think, like Mr. Grant and Ms. J said, getting the information out there. As long as the information is available to them, they usually come out and ask for assistance and so on, and work with us, because if they also know somebody else who's in need, they would bring that person to us. So, and they're very good at doing that. They are, I mean, they network like nothing you've ever seen. You send one message and tell one person there's a hamper available to you, and 600 people show up because they have that kind of network. So any information you want out there, you want to get out there, you just got to know the right persons, and they get that information in 5 minutes. You can have a group of people responding to whatever it is you put out there, saying that, look, I need somebody. This organization needs somebody. They need cleaners, or they need drivers, or they need masons. You can get that information out there very quickly. So I think that is key.
And if I may add, not to emphasize too much on social media, touching on a point by Ms. James and Ms. Chase, is that you do have to do a lot of groundwork in terms of community outreach. And I know these ladies are queens in doing that. But outside of working in the community, in the more urban areas in Region 3 and Region 4, in the remote and rural areas, or remote areas such as Region 1 and Region 2, where most of the migrants are, we have to do a lot of outreach. And as Kean would have mentioned, is the question of knowing those community leaders. So one, knowing where the communities, the host communities are, where the migrants are mostly populated. Two, knowing the leaders that can help you to navigate the community, those communities, and knowing what the needs are of those communities, and then to do your outreach to create that awareness and to provide the services that are needed. And as much as technology in terms of mobile phones, see information share, move very fast. In the indigenous communities where you do have a lot of indigenous Swawa migrants, you'll be equally amazed when we do outreaches where their mode of transportation is on the waterway with the canoes. And if you're doing any outreach, I'm often very surprised how they know we reach. I look for the smoke signals or something, but they're already there. So I think knowing how to navigate the community, the leaders, and even some of the challenges guides us in terms of creating awareness and how to go about our outreach activities.
Now, this question is specific to the host communities. How does humanitarian, or how do they benefit from humanitarian assistance?
Everything that we offer, host communities benefit. And like we said previously, every announcement that we make, we ensure that we make it in English, because that's the host community language. So let's say we're doing an outreach and we're sharing school items. It's never a situation where we say, listen, you're not a migrant, don't. We always ensure, and like Jermaine would have said earlier, there's always a ratio that we try to hit. It's very important for us because we know Guyanese are just as vulnerable as migrants, and everything that we are offering, we ensure that we let them know there is a part for you to benefit from this. So it's very important for us in the work that we do that everything that we share, all the information that's out there, we ensure that we let host communities know that we see you, we understand, and we are here to serve you also. Yeah.
I think the importance of engaging the host community, I think is important for collaboration to create the synergies between the host community and the migrant population. And it's important to not compound any perception or any reality of xenophobia, right? So we must have a ratio to take into account also the vulnerabilities of the host population, to take into account their vulnerabilities, their challenges. And I think the important thrust behind including the host community is to build that environment of cooperation and integration to make settlement for the migrants better and essentially is to build a human family, right, between the migrants and the hosts and to make things better. And the important thing to note, and this reminds me of the conversation I had last night with a migrant when she was speaking about her reality in Guyana and the duration she has been here, is that the conversation took a turn where she indicated that she does not want to remain in Guyana because she is still concerned about going back to her home country, but the reality is that she's currently here, she has a good life, she is well integrated and she's working. And that speaks to how important it is to work with the host community so that they create the enabling environment for the migrant to contribute. And as the migrant works and make their contribution for their family, they're also making a contribution to the development of the host community and national development. So it is a symbiotic relationship. It is a collaboration. And that is why we have to work with the host population, because there are gaps, for example, unemployment needs that the migrants can fill, that the host population may not be able to fill. So that is why it's important to always keep them in the process, because they're part of creating a comfortable life for the migrants. And Guyanese are migrant people too. We have Guyanese throughout the English-speaking Caribbean in North America, and we can speak of our migration experience, especially in terms of benefits such as remittances. And migrants here in Guyana wish for no different experience and benefit for their families back home.
Yes. As I was listening to Jermaine, I was thinking to myself, these are all really good points, because the migrants here, what we try to do when we give them livelihood, when we do activities with them on the livelihood, what we like the seed capital, which is like a cash grant to start a small business. Let's say they're doing poultry. They would then, when the chickens are ready to be sold, they sell it to shops right within the community. Then you have, what we were also trying to do was to establish a system where whatever we need to purchase for the migrants, we purchase it within that community, so that community, so that those shopkeepers, if these women are now have a small business preparing salt fish, for example, these community shops would take the saltfish from them. If they're doing poultry, the community shops will take the poultry from them. If they're doing sewing, the community shops can take the uniforms that these women are sewing, that these shops will take it and then resell it to the people in the community. So we try to make, it's not a perfect system, and we're trying to work on that and to make it better. But those are some of the ideas we have to try to get the host community and the migrant community to blend in a better way, so that it's mutually beneficial to both the migrant and the host community. So in that way, not only is it financially beneficial, but it also creates a kind of camaraderie. And there's protection in that the host community will not allow people to bring harm to the migrants, because they see them as their brothers and their sisters, and they protect them just as well as they protect their neighbors' children and their sisters' children. So that's the kind of relationship we're trying to help to foster within these communities.
For each of you, could you say if surveys are done to assess the kind of support that is needed by migrants?
Yes, everything that we do, or everything at the end of PADF and our partners, of course, it must be empirical. So over time, there would have been a lot of data that speaks to the inflow of migrants into Guyana, in this case, Venezuela, and of course, UN organizations, the government through immigration and other agencies, they do have those statistics. Outside of that, grassroots organization, NGOs, especially NGOs that work in those communities, and Ms. James and Ms. Chase can speak to that. They have their points of contact and persons that would be able to give an assessment in terms of movement of persons within certain communities, the amount of persons, the needs. Teams will usually be deployed to make assessments, to do surveys based on targeted questions. And it does require a lot of investment of resources. For example, where most of the migrants are in Region 1. So rather than just getting reports from persons on the ground, it pays to also be on the ground to gather as much data as possible, because it is important to be driven by statistics and driven by information rather than by hearsay. So there are times where you do have to look at the numbers officially from agencies that are experienced on migration data. There are times where you personally will have to be deployed in the fields with a team to gather as much information as possible. And even do surveys on some of the services, not baseline surveys, based on the needs, and even after that service is provided, to get a feedback if the service meet your need, if you're satisfied with that service, how you can improve that service so you can be effective in providing those services in the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah. We've been working with migrants for about 5 years now, and the good thing about the consistent work with a particular group of people, it helps you to see the changes, and that helps us to understand the services that we should put in place. So I would say maybe given our experience and surveys from 4 years ago, you knew that it was many migrants now coming into Guyana with nothing and no plan, so to speak. But now, in 2023, you can see that there's a complete shift. People are now who have been established here, they're bringing their families because they've been established. They're no longer, the initial need is no longer finding a place to stay because my family's already here, they already know the bus system, the route, where to go, how to come. Before, they were only coming in, usually we'd hear them coming in from Charity, we'd hear them coming in from Ogle. Now we know that there are other methods and other routes, that they're coming through to reach the Guyana, which of course immigration is also aware of. So it helps us to understand, all right, what are some of the needs that they're now coming with, and how is it that we need to tailor our service to ensure that these humanitarian assistance that we're giving is essential for what the needs are and not just there. Because we could say, oh, well, they all need help to get into school, and we need to keep doing workshops on how to get into school. But the reality is the families here, the previous children already established in the school system, they know, listen, hey, we just came yesterday. Here is our birth certificate. Can we please get it translated? So it's no longer that we need to do those things, but they're already steps ahead of. So it helps to have knowledge in the area, and it helps to track, like Jermaine said, with the other established agencies who do more comprehensive surveys to have an understanding of what they're seeing is the changes, and what they're seeing is the needs as the time progresses.
Yes, and that is so true, because what we did last year, or in this last project year, is going to be modified in the next project year, because we have seen, for my organization, we had an activity where we were supposed to provide transportation assistance to school-age children to get them to and from school. We really don't need that activity anymore, because the kids are going to school within the community, walking distance, they don't need that. So that the monies that we would have previously set aside to do that, we can put it into another activity. So as we work with them and we assess without, without the big fancy kind of assessment and survey and all of that, but based on what they commonly ask us for, and based on the activities that we have set out to do for that project year, if we realize that we are not meeting our targets in that particular activity, it means that this activity is not needed. And so in the next project year, we will not consider that activity for funding. What we would do is use that money we would have previously put aside for that and put it somewhere. So the needs of the migrants changes from year to year and from community to community, because there are communities where unemployment level is very high, and in other communities it's not. Their issue is housing, right? They're comfortable, they have jobs and all of that, but the housing situation, they might be living in a squatter settlement or something like that. So those are some of the things that we look at when we are going to prepare for the next project year, and how we, distribute the funds to provide for the needs, the current needs of the migrant.
And if I may add, I think the important thing about the data that takes an assessment on the needs of the migrants, it also makes an assessment of the condition of the host community, right? Because anytime there's a guest in one's home, that comes with a cost, right? And some can attest to that when you have uninvited guests and guests where, as Guyana would say, soon you see the milk finishing, the sugar finishing, who's going to cover this cost? You start getting nervous. How long will you got here, right? So I'm saying, and I think contextually, when those assessments are done to assess the needs of the migrants and what exists in the host community to meet the needs of the migrants, is to know where to cushion and respond to those needs. And the importance of humanitarian assistance contextually is to not add additional burden to the host community and to serve as a buffer, and to not compound poverty, to not compound hardship, and not to create any additional challenges that may exist. So the surveys that are done, taking account the needs of the migrants, is taking also account what exists within the host community and how to respond. Because if you have a lot of migrants in a host community that does not have a medical center, right, and there's some medical outbreak, or maybe they don't have a language class, that is going to create conflict and pose challenges in that host community. So once an assessment is done, it's like, okay, we need to see how best we may have a case management program in terms of providing some form of transportation assistance or intervention so that they can access healthcare, they can be enrolled into schools, and they could get the required form of assistance that may not exist in that community and that those migrants need, so as to not create any challenges, conflict, hardship, and even compound poverty. So the assessment can be very broad and take into account a lot of things, but it must be, the work is driven by data and driven by information so that you can respond effectively.
Given the work that you have been doing and are doing in Guyana right now, who would you say are most in need of humanitarian support?
Venezuelan migrants.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say Venezuelan migrants, and many may have their perspective on other group of migrants in country. But Venezuelan migrants, one, because for the last 4 to 5 years, there have been a significant inflow of that migrant population into the country, while not large compared to, let's say, Colombia and other neighboring countries that have it in the hundreds of thousands and millions. There has been a significant inflow. One. Two, the question of the economic hardship in their country of origin, right? Compared to other migrants that are coming, that are economic migrants that are arriving by traditional means through an airport, which means they can afford an air ticket. A lot of migrants from Venezuela that are coming to Guyana are coming through crossing the border by land or by sea. They're taking very treacherous and difficult journeys to Guyana, arriving with nothing. And on arrival, there is need for humanitarian assistance in terms of food assistance, shelter assistance, integration support to put them on a path, as I often like to say, from vulnerability to self-sustainability. Many are ashamed because they had good lives and now they have been reduced to a state of mendicancy and they have to swallow their pride, so at least they can get back on their feet and be independent. They're not looking for handouts. No migrant, I believe, is looking for handouts, but they just want to be on a path of economic self-sustainability to meet their needs of the families. They're not keeping their money, they're sending it back home to support their families. And many Guyanese can relate to our relatives in North America that send home the little small piece, and it is no different. So for that group of persons or that migrant population, they're very vulnerable, the needs are great, and that is why we respond how we do. And of course, we take into account the host community in the process.
I think people really underestimate the crisis in Venezuela. And so when you hear the migrants coming, you automatically assume that they're coming to take advantage of the services that we have available. But the reality is, like Jermaine would have said, many of them are leaving families, many of them are leaving once a very comfortable life and starting literally from scratch. And most of them, I would say, they're trying to live a life where they are giving back to our society while still providing for the family that they left. So it's really when he spoke a bit earlier about the migrant who's like, oh yeah, I have a comfortable life in Guyana, but I want to go back to Venezuela. We know of many Guyanese who spent years in the North America, but at the end of the day, carry me back home. This is where my navel string berry, and we understand that this is what, even if your family is your country of origin is suffering, there is a pull and emotional attachment to going back to that place where you were born and where you call home. And many migrants, for them to look at the situation of what their home has been reduced to, I understand how difficult it is for them. And coming to Guyana sometimes is not by choice per se, but it's what is needed. It is necessary. It is necessary. And the good thing about the situation of our country right now is that, one, we are able to support the migrants when they get here. And the migrants are coming with wealth of experience. We have the oil boom happening. Venezuela has had the oil boom for how many decades before us? So it's kind of a win-win situation. And if we can do our part as NGOs in offering assistance to bring them up to par where they're able to, one, support their families back home and still support themselves and give to the country, I don't see what is the harm in that.
Yes. Well, like Kean said, that people underestimate what it's like to be away from home. We also got to think about how difficult it is when they come to some place with nothing. And think about a mother. I know years ago, women in Guyana used to leave their children with relatives and go abroad in search of a better life for their children. So think about a situation like that where men are coming. Sometimes they leave their wives and their children home. Sometimes they bring their wives and they leave the children with relatives. You have all these mixed of situations. And so it's really traumatic sometimes when they leave home and they come with just the clothes on their back. Like Jermaine said, there's no plan. They have nothing. They're just coming here with hope that life will be better here and they can make something of themselves and garner enough resources to go back home and maybe pick up the pieces from there once the country starts to get better. So they're particularly vulnerable because of all these circumstances here. And while in Guyana here, we do have people living below the poverty line and living in really terrible situations, there are resources and there are avenues available to them that are not available to the Venezuelan. Like they can take their ID card and go to the Ministry of Human Services and they're eligible for public assistance and they're eligible for old age pension and they're eligible and because they speak the language, the healthcare system can provide for them immediately without any barriers at all. So though they are vulnerable, they're not as vulnerable as the Venezuelan because of their particular circumstance.
In the last year, what would you say was the scope of humanitarian support offered?
In terms of the suite of services, well, everything under the sun. Everything under the sun. But often the significant need is food, right? The significant need is food. The question of shelter. Then there is support to victims of gender-based violence. That fits in the context of shelter. Provision of psychosocial support. Let us not underestimate the question of mental health. There has been a significant provision of services in providing psychosocial support. Many persons come with trauma in terms of having to leave their home to cope in a new environment, to deal with issues of not knowing the language, challenges of integrating. And we have been providing a lot of psychosocial support to a lot of migrants, some specialized support in terms of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, you name it, it exists. And it has been a lot in terms of the service. And I think outside those tangible service that some would have just mentioned, English as a second language, right? Because of that barrier, there's a need to integrate, and it starts by knowing the language. We know if we travel soon, we arrive at border control and you interface with that immigration officer, is to communicate effectively so that you're understood to get stamping. So it is no easy, it is no different for the migrants. And at the end of PADF, while we do provide ESL classes, we did provide support before to government agencies in terms of learning Spanish as a second language to help so those frontline staff interfacing Spanish-speaking migrants, especially Venezuelans, can effectively communicate. So once a need is requested, we do our best, but it could be anything, right? Clothing, medical assistance, you name it.
Well, Jermaine covered it all, and I'm really happy that he mentioned psychosocial support, because I think we underestimate the trauma that can come with moving to a new country. Moving to a new country where the people don't look like you, moving to a new country where if you're female and you look a certain way, there's a stigma automatically placed on you in many situations. Moving to a new country where you might get a text message saying that the parent that you left died, or the house that you left was vandalized, or something that has happened that you have absolutely no way of coping and dealing with that. So, we've had many situations where psychosocial support is sometimes the only need that is requested. And I really empathize with migrants who come to this country, leaving their families and established lives behind, and starting over from scratch in your 40s, in your 30s. I know one of my clients is a woman in her 40s with 5 children, no father, doesn't know the language, and she was a domestic worker in Venezuela. So it is not as though, she came here with a wealth of experience and knowledge. So but to see her progress and embrace Guyana, and to see her, she's always going to be one of my favorite stories, because she is making it. And one of the things I appreciate about her is any migrant she encounters, she assists them. And she's very respectful of the services that was provided to her. And she's very thankful and grateful for Guyana. And the fact that, coming through border control, she didn't have to convince them to let her stay here. It was a matter of just, hey, this is my ID card. I plan on abiding by your rules. You go to the immigration services and they gave you a stay permit, and she was able to continue to renew that permit because she knew how fortunate she was to be here. And those are some of the situations that for us and the service that we provide makes our work really matter. Yeah.
Well, I think Jermaine covered basically what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Because, when you're out there, we all encounter the same kind of things, different people, but circumstances more or less are the same.
And I think Guyanese should give themselves a pat on the back because while for many migrants they do experience xenophobia in many countries, the level of xenophobia in Guyana is not as high, I would say, in my assessment and experience compared to other countries.
Yeah.
And our level of humanity and hospitality has been exceptional. Maybe it's because of our own experience as Guyanese people as being a mobile population, having relatives overseas and their experience and their migration journey. So we should give our pat on the back. The services at the level of the different government agencies as being one that is like an open door policy, but still with the checks and balances to ensure persons abide by the laws and the rules of the game.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry. Thank you very much for agreeing to this panel discussion. And I know that the information you've shared will be very beneficial to our viewers.
Thank you very much.
The production of this video is supported by the Pan American Development Foundation and is funded by the United States government.